I think the communication has made it more difficult. The way we communicate these different things has made it more difficult to get the currency picture there. I actually think it's perfectly clear in terms of climate change where the currency fits in. I mean, we have a global resource. We have a global garbage dump that we share with everyone else on this planet. And you can think of it as an account. And when politicians say that they want to keep human-caused global warming to within 2 degrees, it's really very simple to calculate how much money is there in this account, how much there's, and we can say that over half of that now is used. And we know exactly who used the first half. So the whole political discussion is about who's going to get the rights to use the last half of that resource. And it's who's going to get the rights to use the last half of that bank account. So I actually think the currency picture is very clear. Unfortunately, we don't communicate it that way. When we start talking about an Earth Overshoot Day, the first thing that happens is journalists start phoning to me and say, Denmark's number 12 on the list. Can we believe in the methods that have been used to show that it's number 12? And I say, no. You can't. I mean, every time you make this kind of a list, you have to make certain kinds of assumptions that fit better or worse in different countries. What you can use it for is to say that Denmark is at the top of the list, is among the big resource users. But whether we're number 6 or number 20, this method can't. Yes, but it says we're number 12. Do you think we're number 12? And it's irrelevant if we're number 12. The point is we're using too much in terms of, and so the whole focus gets down to, well, are we really in front of or behind Sweden? That's the really big thing. We don't like to be number 2 after Sweden. And fortunately, in the rankings this year, Denmark comes in above in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. Denmark comes in above Sweden. Whew. So we can say we're very, very good. But we're still very, 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 very far away from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We're good at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which are all about people. We're good in terms of poverty, hunger, health, education, gender equality, and access to sanitation and clean water. But we're failing miserably when it comes to 12, 13, 14, and 15, which is responsible consumption, production and consumption, climate, and biodiversity in the ocean and on land. I'm sitting in a panel under the UN at the moment, which is writing the next Global Sustainable Development Report. And we point out that there are 4 levers that have to be used in every case to change our food system, our energy system, our economic system. And those 4 levers are governance, which gives a role to politicians, but not just to politicians, also to businesses, because we don't have a global government, and government is not the same as governance. So lots of actors have a role to play in governance, but governance is one of them. Economics and finance is also, I mean, we need to change, the cost of using resources. We need to consider getting our whole trade system, that it's not for maximizing money, but minimizing resource use. So it's governance, it's economics and finance, it's individual and collective action. How do we perform as a society? How do we perform as individuals? And finally, yes, it's also about technology. But technology is only going to be able to help us to use resources more efficiently or find alternatives for some of them, for example, with energy. But technology can't take away the ultimate limitation that the geophysical, the lack of resources has. So it will never be able to produce new resources. And there are many things, for example, phosphorus, that technology will never be able to find a replacement for. So you need to use those 4 levers all the time. And I think it's to make change. And I think it's very, very wrong, this finger pointing that's going on. You eat meat, or you fly, you're awful. We all have, just like the money in our bank, the possibility to use our resources in different ways. We haven't structured our society to be able to deal with these kinds of issues, especially issues that deal with interactions. We've always, we think in terms of sectors, in terms of boxes, and our entire economic system is built up around these boxes or sectors. And we're realizing in all aspects of science, it's really not about the boxes themselves, it's about the interactions. I mean, 10 years ago, who would have thought that your gut flora were so important for your psychological state and your immune system as we now know them to be? So we're not geared to look at interactions, and I think one of the reasons that it's a slow process in terms of flying. I mean, the technology's there. There's no individual land where politicians can say, this is the way we're going to do this. We don't actually have a government that's responsible for saying how we're going to solve the flying problem. And that means that it's very difficult because you've got a very strong lobby in the businesses. I mean, what you have to remember here is we've got this built-in conflict around sustainability, that you have human development here, the SDGs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you have the global resources up here, and you've got this pressure between them. And how is it that we humans ask for resources? Well, we ask them through the food system, through the energy system, through our transport system, including flying, and through our materials for production, through our infrastructure, cities, and so on. But in almost every case, the infrastructure through which we access those resources is in private hands. It's in business. And the politicians that we have operate in the space between us and business. They don't operate in the space between the companies and the global resources. So something like flying is going to be very, very difficult to move over time. Many of us are counting on them happening in order to be able to do this, because people keep coming and saying, this course I gave last week, how can you be optimistic when it looks as bad as it does? And I can be optimistic because I see so much happening around. There's litigation starting. There are tons of cases now because you can do attribution. You can say so much of this storm or this flooding or this wind, so much extra was it because of climate change. Then you can go back to the big companies that are causing it, and it's happening. Mostly in the States, interestingly enough, given that the States is officially out of all of this. But it's the same picture as around smoking. That you see all this, and none of them have been won yet, but one day they're going to win. And you see boards, boards of directors watching these litigation and thinking, is there a risk here? And asking their, and funders asking, what are you doing? What is this company doing to show that it's compatible with the Paris Agreement? So you see it sort of infiltrating into the boardrooms. You see the EU coming with a taxonomy around finance. That in 2021 that's going to come into effect, which basically says you don't invest in a power plant that emits more than X or Y. You see the World Bank reneging on a power plant, a coal power plant that it was supposed to build in, I think it was in Serbia, because their rules say that they have to use the cheapest technology possible. And in fact, solar was cheaper than coal by the time they got around to starting it. So you see all these different things happening. And I say we have to use the financial system, we have to use the governance system, we have to use people part of it, and we have to use the technology part of it to change. But the stars could be aligning to support a social tipping point. And that doesn't mean that any of us can sit back and say, oh, well, it's going to happen anyway, because you'll probably never be able to assess the percentage of responsibility that impactor or civil society or a political party has on any change or social tipping point. But you can never do the experiment where they're not there to find out that they weren't important at all. And I suspect that all of it's important.